Today we're going to be talking about Atlantics, which is a feminist take on an African immigrant narrative by French Senegalese director Madi Diop. We follow the story of construction workers in Senegal who aren't being paid the wages they were promised. Opposite them star their girlfriend, but really the protagonist of the film is Ada, who is in love with Suleiman, who is one of the construction workers that we meet at the beginning of the film. Ada is totally in love with Suleiman and he's in love with her, but she's engaged to a rich man, something that makes her parents happy and her friends jealous, but something she is too independent to accept. One day, the construction workers sail for Spain to find better opportunities, leaving their girlfriends, including Ada, behind. And the rest of the film follows Ada as she mourns the loss of Suleiman and grapples with the role that her society expects her to play instead. What I think is interesting about Atlantics is it uses horror motifs to express feminist messages, and horror and feminism is really cool to combine, so we're gonna look at that. I originally had 4 scenes picked out, but I only have time to analyze 2. So we're gonna look at how Ada's Unwanted Marriage and the graveyard scene at the end of the film use horror to show the gravity of these women's unempowered positions in their patriarchal society. The first scene I want to bring our attention to is the marriage scene where Ada gets married to the rich man, someone that she is not interested in, and a marriage that she's sort of forced into by society's standards. This is a great example of how Atlantics blends genres, as this is supposed to be a clearly happy celebration, but it really comes across as very creepy. We see Ada driving up to the wedding, and in the background we hear the sounds of women chanting and singing and welcoming her to the wedding, but really it comes across as totally creepy and sort of something out of a horror film, maybe something we would see in a film about demons. The corporeality of Ada in the scene is also really adds to this concept of horror, as she's not happy. She's covered in black the whole time and her body language is really stiff and kind of looks afraid in some of the scenes, which sort of makes her seem less like a really happy wife about to be married and more like a human sacrifice awaiting her doom. And something that really adds to that is the diegetic lighting of the scene. We see sort of this harsh white light fall on her when she exits the car, which illuminates her and kind of makes it seem like she's entering into an otherworldly realm as she walks through the door to her husband's house. This, to me, this screams so many elements of horror. We have this idea of chanting and singing as someone walks to their end, and the light that's kind of walking her into another worldly realm is sort of straight out of something you would see in a horror film. I think this obviously has a lot of feminist messaging in it, because while Ada is not walking to her death, she is walking to her doom. She's being forced into a marriage with a man she doesn't love simply for the sake of money and for pleasing her parents and fitting into this society that dictates that women have to rely on men to get anywhere in life. And so it really is sort of this really disturbing way to show just how terrible this marriage is in Ada's mind. The last scene I want to talk about is the graveyard scene where the women, possessed by their boyfriends, finally get the wages from the construction manager and also end up forcing him to dig all the graves for their dead boyfriends. I think this whole idea of the women being possessed by their boyfriend's spirits says a lot about what happens to women in these desperate situations. Here the men left and they left a lot behind, and the women are now in charge of carrying on their legacy and advocating for their men, getting the wages back, and dealing with what the men left behind. And they do all this while also dealing with the pain of missing their men and of a future that they were not going to get back. And most tragically at all, still being stuck in the same situation they were in with no way of getting out. I think the body language of the women here is really interesting. They just look so dominant and confident, which is really a contrast to a lot of Ada's body language at the beginning of the film. She does a lot of sulking and walking and looking sort of meek, which is totally intentional, I think. And here we see these women, challenging the construction manager, demanding things of him, and he's completely powerless under them. I think it's interesting also that the director chose to have the girlfriends being possessed by their men, because even though this is a scene that gives them a lot of agency, they're still literally being possessed by men, which sort of shows just how tragic these women's situation are. Even with their men dead, their lives are still revolving around men. So in conclusion, Atlantics uses horror to really awaken us to the reality of these women's situation and shock us into feeling how desperate they are in this patriarchal society. Thanks for watching.